In a quiet convent, the sound of someone calling out echoed through the courtyard. A nun went to check and found a young girl at the gate, pleading to stay there. 3 weeks earlier, that girl, Stella, the eldest daughter of Marquis Marble, had been preparing for her tea with Lord Alfred, her fiancé. It had been 10 years since their engagement. Ever since she turned 17, they had met twice a month. Stella's thoughts were filled with dreams of their wedding. She had once shown Alfred ideas for her dress, excited and hopeful, but he hadn't cared much. That day, as she raised her hand to knock on the door where they usually met, she heard something that froze her. It was her younger sister's voice, Fiona. She was only a year younger, born for her father's second wife. Stella felt uneasy. It was supposed to be her time with Alfred, not Fiona's. Fiona was beautiful, angelic even. Everyone adored her. Through the door, Stella heard Fiona's cheerful voice asking Alfred if a certain dress suited her. Fiona mentioned she wished she could wear elegant clothes like Stella, but people said she was too young. Alfred laughed, teasing her about being her parents' little doll. Then he offered to buy her a dress himself. Before Fiona could answer, Stella opened the door. What she saw shattered her, her sister holding her fiancé's hands. They both looked startled. Fiona stammered that she had tripped, and Alfred helped her up. But he showed no concern for Stella's tears. In his usual cold tone, he told her to stop overreacting, that such trivial things were unworthy of a lady. He scolded her for not worrying about her sister instead, and accused her of always blaming him when Fiona was involved. Fiona apologized, but Alfred only apologized to her. He then gently escorted Fiona to the door, leaving Stella alone. Watching them together, they looked like true lovers. Was Stella only meant to make things convenient for them? She wanted to run. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. She said he had never been so cruel before. But Alfred didn't care. Sitting across from her, he snapped. He called her troublesome and demanded she put herself in his shoes. "How can you get angry over something so small?" he shouted. He told her she should be grateful that he still intended to marry her, even though she had no special skill. That was when Stella understood. Fiona had the gift of healing, a divine skill discovered through a temple ritual when noble children turned 7. Those who gained such powers were called saints or quasi-saints. Fiona had been blessed with healing, while Stella hadn't even been allowed to take part in the ritual. Looking up at Alfred, Stella calmly told him that he must have resented her for a long time. Then she apologized. Alfred slammed his teacup down, saying there was no need for farewells. When she tried to follow, he told her not to, and just like that, she was left alone. Outside, she saw Alfred and Fiona strolling together, smiling as if nothing had happened. The sight pierced her heart. Alone in her room, she stared into the mirror and wondered why no one loved her. Maybe it was because her parents' marriage had been political. Everything she owned was secondhand from her late mother. Her maid had left. Her face looked pale and tired. Maybe she was simply unlovable. Her maid then came to call her. Her father wanted to see her. Stella obeyed. Her father's first words were harsh. He scolded her for abandoning Alfred and Fiona, accusing her of being a poor host. When she tried to explain, he yelled that it was her own fault for not winning Alfred's heart. If Fiona's reputation was ruined, he said, Stella would take the blame. Despite his cruelty, Stella could only apologize. He sneered that she had the same empty pride and rebellious eyes as her mother. Stella thought of her mother, strict yes but kind. Her father never understood her, always seeing his resentment reflected in Stella's face. Then came a knock. Fiona entered, smiling sweetly and saying she came to play. Though he scolded her for barging in, his tone softened immediately. He even offered to show her his ship in a bottle, his voice full of warmth. Then, turning cold again, he dismissed Stella. That night, lying in bed, Stella thought of how noble marriages were often just politics. Children like her were born unloved. Her father's tenderness was reserved only for Fiona. Maybe she was the reason for his unhappiness. Sitting at her vanity, she decided something had to change. If things continued this way, no one would ever be happy. She went to the drawing room where Alfred was sitting. His face fell when he saw her. Stella bowed politely and said there was something she wished to discuss. She wanted to break off their engagement. Later, in the convent, that same girl, Stella, sat with the nun who had welcomed her in. Over tea, she told her everything. The nun listened kindly and asked if she truly had no place left in her family's home. Stella nodded. The nun looked sad but told her she could stay as long as she worked. Stella agreed gratefully, happy just to have shelter and purpose. The nun then asked if she could rely on her mother's relatives, but Stella said their ties were weak and they lived far away. So the nun guided her to her room, a small, bright chamber with a bed and desk. For the first time in a long while, Stella felt at peace. Meanwhile, Alfred had not taken her words well. He reminded her that their betrothal was a family contract that couldn't be broken so easily. "What will you do?" he asked mockingly. "Who would marry a girl without a single skill?" Stella's voice was steady. She said she would leave and find her own happiness. What came next was none of his concern. Alfred growled that it would always concern him. But before he could say more, a knock interrupted them. Fiona entered, curtsying politely. "I came to pay my respects," she said. Stella smiled faintly. "Perfect timing," she replied. Alfred tried to stop her, but Stella ignored him. She told Fiona to take her place and attend to Lord Alfred, then turned to leave. Alfred shouted for her to wait, but she didn't look back. She walked away quickly. That night, she cut her long hair and sold it for travel money. Dressed in an old maid's uniform, she slipped out of the mansion, leaving behind a short letter. As she journeyed onward, she remembered her mother's words. "If you ever find yourself with nowhere to go, seek the convent." And so she did. There, in that quiet, sunlit place, Stella finally began to hope again. The nun smiled gently and said it must be quite a change from the life Stella once knew. But this was how things were in the convent. Stella assured her that everything was more than enough, thanking her sincerely. When she sat down on her small bed, Stella opened a tiny box and took out a string of pearls. She handed it to the nun as a token of gratitude, explaining it had belonged to her late mother. The nun examined it carefully, noticing an emblem engraved on the clasp. She began to read it aloud, but Stella quickly admitted she didn't know much about her family's history. The nun smiled and handed the necklace back, saying Stella should keep it. Her hard work and devotion were already enough. Then, teasing her lightly, the nun told her to change out of her tattered clothes into new tattered ones, and to smile more often, since she looked lovely when she did. After changing, Stella was told to come back downstairs so the nun could teach her the rules of convent life. Before she left her room, Stella glanced out the window. For the first time, she saw the village from a new perspective, simple, quiet, and alive. Lying back for a moment, she felt an unfamiliar sense of relief wash over her. Her first duty was cleaning. The nun explained that Stella would be responsible for dusting the high places that were hard to reach. Climbing a ladder and covering her mouth, Stella began to work. She found herself grateful just to have something meaningful to do. When she finished, the hallway gleamed brighter than she had ever seen it. The nun was stunned. "It's cleaner than when it was built," she said in awe. Embarrassed, Stella said she had only done a little, but the nun shook her head. "No, it feels pure, as if the air itself has become fresh, like the light of dawn." Stella smiled faintly, wondering if that was what dawn truly felt like. The nun then asked whether Stella had a special skill, given her noble birth. Stella admitted she didn't. She had never gone through the ceremony that revealed one's gift. Her half-sister, however, had the power to heal. The nun listened quietly as Stella explained, then led her to the next task, cooking. In the kitchen, Stella worked beside the other nuns, chopping potatoes and boiling vegetables. Though she wasn't very skilled, they praised her effort and kindness. When they all sat down to eat, Stella found herself smiling, more than she had in years. Days passed peacefully. Stella grew used to life at the convent. She cleaned, cooked, tended the gardens, and drank tea with the others. At first, she feared her father might come to take her back, but that day never came. Gradually, her heart began to settle. One day, Sister Mary, the older nun who had first welcomed her, called Stella aside. She told her about a position opening at the royal palace, either as a maid or a lady-in-waiting. The duties, she explained, would be similar to what Stella had already been doing. Mary promised to handle the matter with Stella's family so that she could focus on her new beginning. Stella's eyes brightened. She thanked Mary and promised to do her best. The nun clasped her hands warmly, and soon after, Stella set out for the palace. There, she was shown around and given a brand new uniform, a maid's dress of fine material. Her guide explained that she would be serving none other than Prince Cecil, the first prince. He lived alone in a tower, separated from the rest of the palace. As they walked toward it, Stella began to notice something strange. The air grew heavy, thick with a strange energy. The miasma. Her guide explained that the previous caretaker, a friend of Sister Mary's, had fallen ill because of it. Alarmed, Stella asked if the tower was truly safe. Her guide sighed. "It's the heart of the palace, where wealth, emotion, and power all gather. Perhaps the miasma is drawn here for that reason. Still, we do what we must. Stella's thoughts darkened. If the prince lived in such a place, how lonely must his life be? From the top of the tower, the prince watched her approach. He wondered silently how long she would last. Inside, the tower was dim and oppressive. A single heavy door led to the prince's chambers. The air felt suffocating. Could anyone really live here? The head maid, however, seemed unfazed. She looked back at Stella. Are you all right? Stella nodded, though her chest felt tight. Don't worry, the head maid said calmly. It's frightening at first, but you'll be fine as long as you don't stay too long. She walked briskly ahead, and Stella hurried after her. The darkness thickened into a smog so dense it was hard to breathe. Somewhere ahead, the head maid stopped and spoke respectfully into the shadows. Your Highness, we have brought your new caretaker. Stella stepped forward, bowing low toward the unseen figure. It's an honor to serve you, Your Highness, she said softly, though she still couldn't see him. The head maid turned to Stella. This room behind you is the waiting chamber. You'll stay there when you're not attending to the prince. If you ever feel unwell, speak up immediately or we'll replace you. Then, with a polite smile, the head maid left, leaving Stella alone. Her eyes slowly adjusted. The air was so heavy it felt like a monster could be born from it. Trying to focus, she called out, Your Highness, shall I open a window? A faint voice answered yes. Startled, Stella realized the prince really was there. She hurried to open the window, and a fierce gust nearly knocked her over. Of course, they were at the top of the tower. Your name is Stella, right? The prince asked. Yes, Your Highness, she replied, smiling nervously. Then he said calmly, Your skirt just flew up. Flustered, Stella yanked it down, her cheeks burning. Did you see? She stammered. No, he said, then added, but I did see your stockings and garter. Mortified, Stella mumbled that she would put away her things in the waiting room. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw him reading a book. How could he even see in this darkness? Deciding her first task was to clean, she gathered her supplies and got to work. The prince's voice drifted from the shadows. Are you all right? I'm fine, Stella answered, though sweat trickled down her neck. Would it be acceptable to start with your chambers, Your Highness? Go ahead, he replied. Despite being under house arrest, Prince Cecil didn't act cruel or bitter. He was calm, even kind, something Stella hadn't expected. Bit by bit, she scrubbed, dusted, and wiped until the heavy air began to lift. The room grew brighter, softer, almost peaceful. The prince spoke again, surprised. Aren't you dizzy from the miasma? No, Stella said, smiling. The visibility's poor, but I'm fine. He sounded astonished. Most maids can't even stay in the waiting room without fainting. I guess I'm lucky, she said, continuing her work. How are you feeling, Your Highness? He hesitated. I can barely stand. Her heart ached at that. No one should live like this. She silently promised to keep the place clean for him, to make it a little more bearable. When she finally finished, she turned to him and smiled. The prince was now clearly visible, sitting on a couch, long, messy hair falling over his eyes. He looked at her and said softly, Thank you. No one's ever made this room so clean before. Stella smiled back. I'm glad. Her gaze lingered on his hair. It looked heavy and tangled. Your Highness, she said hesitantly, would you like me to cut your hair for you? The prince tilted his head. You can do that. I only meant, she began, flustered. It just seemed difficult to manage. She immediately regretted speaking, realizing how improper it sounded, standing behind a royal with scissors. But to her surprise, he didn't mind. It is troublesome, he admitted. If you can find scissors, I wouldn't refuse. Encouraged, Stella nodded and hurried off to ask for them. When she reached the maid headquarters, they questioned her about the request. She explained what the prince had said, and once they confirmed his permission, they handed her a pair of scissors. One of the maids joked that it was fine as long as Stella wasn't a spy, and if she was, then it was the prince's problem to deal with. The comment made Stella wonder just how powerful the prince really was. When she returned to the tower, a chair and towel were already waiting for her. The prince sat there with almost childlike excitement. Stella was touched that he had prepared everything himself. Have you ever cut hair before? He asked. Stella laughed nervously. Only my own. For the first time, the prince looked at her properly, and Stella was caught off guard by his deep blue eyes that gleamed like sapphires. She admitted she couldn't really see his hair clearly with it tied up. He smiled and told her to do as she liked. She started cutting a little too eagerly, and accidentally snipped off more than she meant to. Not too short, the prince quickly protested. Keep it neat, not too long, not too short. Stella promised to be careful and told him firmly to let her focus. He was far too bold with his teasing, but she kept her concentration, trimming slowly and gently. Silky strands fell to the floor, revealing fair skin, a proud nose, and those mesmerizing eyes. By the end, the prince looked like a new man. It wasn't perfect, but it was respectable. Stella handed him a mirror. He blinked, surprised. "So, I'm actually handsome?" he said, half joking. Stella smiled. "You look much better now," she replied, then asked why he'd let his hair get so messy. He shrugged. "No reason. I just kept putting it off until years passed." Stella thought bitterly that no one must have cared enough to notice. Even her neglectful family hadn't been this bad. She asked softly, "How can you live like this?" The prince assumed she meant his isolation. "It's not unpleasant," he said calmly. "I can read, study, sleep, and wake whenever I want. Isn't that the perfect life? But what about your health?" Stella pressed. "Isn't it dangerous to live in a place filled with dark energy?" He looked puzzled. "Dark?" Stella explained that the miasma was so thick that she could barely see. The prince blinked. "I can only feel a faint prickling on my skin," he said. Then, settling back into his couch with a book, he added, "Your manners and movements, they're like those of a noble woman." Stella froze. He noticed. He continued, "You can see the miasma clearly. That's rare. Is it your skill? Are you perhaps a half-saint?" But Stella had already fallen silent, lost in her thoughts. "I don't have any skill," she whispered sadly. The prince was stunned. "No skill? That can't be." "It's true," she sighed. He studied her face. "You look like a saint," he said quietly. "Looks don't mean much," she replied. "I'm serious," he said. "You even resemble the former saint a little. Have you seen her in the Great Hall?" "No," Stella said. "Then you must have been to one of the palace balls, right? You seem like a noble's daughter." Stella shook her head. "I never had the chance." "I see," he murmured. "Then maybe you're an illegitimate child? That would explain why someone like you was kept hidden." His words stung, but she kept her composure. "I was born and raised in that house," she said quietly. "So how am I the illegitimate one, and not Fiona?" The prince gave her a sympathetic smile and patted the seat beside him. Stella hesitated, then sat down. "You've never been to the temple, have you?" he asked. "The ritual should be done, no matter the result." "They said it wasn't worth trying," Stella replied. "That I wouldn't have any useful skill anyway. And honestly, I believe them." The prince's eyes softened. "Were you afraid of your father?" Just hearing the word made Stella clench her fists. "Yes," she whispered. "A girl can't defy her father, not someone like him." She remembered the fear she'd felt as a child. The prince frowned. "The Marquis made sure his stepdaughter took the ritual. Why not you?" He paused, thinking something he didn't want to say aloud. When he turned back, Stella's eyes were wet with tears. Despite everything, she was touched by his kindness. He had suffered even more than she had, yet still understood her pain. The prince smiled gently. "What? Are my good looks making you cry?" he teased. Stella wiped her eyes. "Don't flatter yourself." He chuckled, forgetting what he'd been about to ask. "Oh, never mind. Some things are better left forgotten. I just want to live happily with whoever I meet from now on." Stella smiled faintly. "You'll remember eventually." Her tears had dried, leaving a quiet calm on her face. She stood up. "I'll go get us some dinner." As she walked down the stairs, her legs ached. She sighed, wishing there were a slide to go down instead. When she came back with a tray of food, the prince invited her to eat with him. "I'm just a maid," she said hesitantly. "Not tonight," he said. "You've worked hard. Don't leave me to eat alone." She understood. Eating alone was lonely. So she set out 2 plates, one for him, one for herself. Prince Cecil smiled. "Enjoy. The chef's food always tastes best when shared." They sat down at the softly lit table. The room was warm and clean now, and the meal tasted even better for it. The prince thanked her sincerely. He couldn't help but notice her graceful manners, another sign of her noble upbringing. "How old are you, by the way?" she asked curiously. 19, he replied. "And you?" 17. Cecil smiled. "The same age as my younger brother." Stella realized that meant the third prince, the heir to the throne. She looked at Cecil again. He was kind, intelligent, and gentle. He didn't seem unfit to rule at all. So why was he trapped here? She decided to ask. "It's because of my skill," he said casually. "Your skill," she echoed. "Destruction," he replied. "They said it makes me unfit to be king." "Destruction of what?" she asked softly. "Anything," he said, voice darkening. He lifted his glass. It crumbled into dust in his hand. Stella gasped. Can you destroy living things too? Yes, he said simply. She tried to hide her fear. Have you ever? He shook his head with a faint, bitter smile. No, but it makes sense they'd be afraid of me. Stella knew, from today alone, that he wasn't the kind to abuse such power. But she also knew the world would never see it that way. You could still live like royalty, she said gently. He looked away. This power attracts dark things. That's why I should stay here. Stella asked if he knew why the miasma was so thick here. Cecil said it was because his skill attracted bad things. Suddenly, everything made sense, his constant naps, his odd games, and the way his father locked him away so he wouldn't be a bad influence on his brothers. All of it traced back to that skill. But Stella gently told him that not everything was his skill's fault. Some of it, she said, was self-inflicted. You shouldn't blame it all on that. Was he already being consumed by the miasma? Cecil then brought up their earlier talk about Stella and her sister, how her family planned to marry her off to the second son of a lesser noble house. Cecil guessed it was because Stella was actually the rightful heir to the House of Marble. He suspected they had switched her with her sister. He explained that Stella's stepmother wasn't of noble birth, and to make her own daughter the true heir, she kept Stella hidden. He even believed they had Stella take the skill ritual in her sister's place. The prince asked if that really made sense. Could someone else even take another person's skill ritual? Cecil said it was possible. A 7-year-old does whatever the adults say, he said softly. And your mother was better than she couldn't stop them. Stella lowered her eyes, finally understanding what had happened. Cecil asked how her family managed to fool the temple, her mother's relatives, and even the servants. Stella explained that she'd only met her mother's relatives when she was very young, and just before her sister arrived, all the servants had been replaced. Cecil was shocked. Replacing an entire household staff isn't easy, he said. Stella nodded, explaining that her father's closest servants had stayed, while her mother's family suddenly stopped writing to her. She started to realize that even her mother's funeral had been oddly simple, as if her family had tried to hide her mother's death. Was it so your stepmother could take her place? Cecil asked. Stella wasn't sure. Maybe she was overthinking it. But her hands gripped the tablecloth tightly, unable to calm down. Cecil reached across and took her hand. I'll help you find the truth, he said. Then he suddenly added, let's go on a date tomorrow. Stella's heart nearly jumped out her chest. A date? But Cecil seemed serious. The next day, he brought her to what he called the #1 date spot, the temple. Stella looked up at the grand building, half amazed and half annoyed that he still called it a date. But Cecil had something he wanted to test. Yawning dramatically, he asked, did you sleep well last night? Same as usual, Stella said. He smiled. Thanks for everything, Stella. I feel lighter already. She remembered last night after dinner, when she had brought warm water for him to wash. He had thanked her, then admitted he needed some help. Nervous, she told him to turn around. When she dipped the sponge into the water, it was scalding hot. Cecil explained it was because of his skill. Destroying water makes it hot, he said. Destroying water? She repeated, confused. He shrugged. I don't really get it either. But skills depend on how you use them. As Stella washed his back, she noticed how lean but broad he was. She shook her head quickly, trying to stay focused. Then Cecil suddenly lifted his hands, feeling something strange. He felt lighter, as if the miasma had been washed away. Did you just clean me? He asked. Stella smiled awkwardly. Maybe. He looked amazed. I'm really looking forward to our date tomorrow. We'll figure out the truth about that ritual. Stella smiled faintly. She couldn't face her father's schemes alone. Having Cecil's help meant a lot. For someone she had just met, he'd already done so much for her. Thank you, she said quietly. Cecil grinned. What's this? Falling for me already? Of course not, she said quickly. But she couldn't help thinking how lonely his life must have been. When you do fall in love someday, she said softly, tell me. I'll help you. I can even deliver secret letters if you want. Cecil chuckled awkwardly. Nothing, he said when she asked what was funny. She told him to lie down so she could wash his hair. He obeyed, and she carefully worked, her hands gentle. When she finished, she told him to keep his eyes closed. You're really good at this, he said, relaxing. Feels amazing. My head's clearer now. She smiled, realizing he'd been watching her the whole time. She was just glad he felt better. Cecil said she could use the rest of the water for herself and offered to help her wash, but Stella immediately refused, blushing hard. That night, Stella was exhausted. She fell asleep as soon as her head hit the pillow. When she woke up, it was still dark. She stepped into the hallway, and the miasma was back. She pulled out her duster and began brushing it away, then opened the window to clear the air, nearly getting blown over. When the air finally calmed, she checked on Cecil. He was sweating, tossing in his sleep, his face twisted in pain. She touched his forehead. It was ice cold. He woke up, and she quickly apologized for entering his room, saying he looked troubled. He smiled faintly. I had a nightmare, but then a gorilla showed up and danced the nightmare away. She blinked, then laughed softly, relieved he was okay. As she turned to leave, Cecil asked, "Could you stay a little longer?" She smiled. "All right, I'll protect you like the gorilla did." He laughed and asked if she could hold his hand. She hesitated, but then agreed. He must have been so starved for warmth. The room was freezing now anyway. "The window's open," she said. They walked over together and watched the sunrise spill across the horizon. "I'll close it," she whispered, reaching for it. But Cecil gently caught her hand. "Leave it open a little longer. I want to feel the breeze." So they stood there, side by side, holding hands as morning light filled the tower. In that quiet moment, Stella thought he looked like someone from a fairy tale. The next day, Cecil arranged a carriage to the temple, but it turned out the temple was much closer than expected. He grumbled about being tired after climbing down so many stairs, and Stella joked about wishing there was a slide. Cecil laughed, agreeing completely. Inside, a priest greeted the prince warmly and asked what brought him there. Cecil said they were looking for answers about the ritual from 10 years ago. The priest promised to find someone who knew and rushed off like a startled rabbit. Stella couldn't help noticing how nervous people seemed around Cecil, probably because of his skill. They were soon joined by an elderly man who claimed to remember that day. Cecil asked about the ritual for Lady Stella Marble. "Oh yes," the old man said loudly. "I remember. She was unusual, left quite the impression." He began a long-winded story, shouting every detail, until Cecil politely interrupted with a smile. "Could we skip ahead to when Lady Stella appeared, and maybe lower the volume a little?" The old man chuckled and continued, saying that Lady Stella had looked uneasy, surrounded by nobles. Something about the scene stood out to him. The blonde hair, the way the Marquis muttered, "I knew choosing this one was right." When the crystal lit up with the word healing, Cecil's suspicions solidified. He thanked the man and turned to Stella. "It's just as I thought. Your sister took the ritual in your place." The priest probably never noticed. They don't attend social events. Stella lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. "I still can't believe it, that my father could do something so cruel."